guys, I want to thank you so much for joining us for another one of our Wednesday devotionals. And today I'm going to continue what we've been talking on. Now, we've hit a lot on praise. Last devotional we did, we talked about the outer courts of praise and what was that was like when it comes to approaching God's presence. In order to approach God's presence, we talked about entering into the gates, and we talked about the altar and the brazen laver. Today we're going to transition from the outer courts of praise into the inward courts of worship and kind of discuss a little bit how worship is different than praise. And that's kind of the main thing I'm going to be talking about today, is just kind of explaining a few of the differences between worship and praise and the level of intimacy that happens when we start moving into worship. You see, praise is a great thing. Praise is awesome. But it's different than worship. It's not the same thing. There's a little difference. When you start moving into worship, you start getting more into intimate fellowship with Jesus and with the Lord, and in intimacy with His presence. That's a little different than what you would encounter during praise. You can have praise, which is like friendship, enjoying, friendship and that kind of stuff. But then when you start moving into the inward courts, it's almost like courtship. It's where you want to try to learn everything about that person. You just want to be with that person. You're not focused on yourself. You're not focused on your needs. You're not focused on things going on around that going on around you or anything like that. You're just you and God, or you and Jesus when you enter into more intimate times of worship or enter into the inner court. So, Psalms 132:7, it says, "Let us go to His dwelling place and let us worship at His footstool." So when we go into worship, it's like we're getting even closer to God. We're going into the dwelling place, because before in the outer courts with praise, you were outside the tabernacle. You're outside the tent of meeting. But when you enter into the inner courts through worship, you're entering closer to His presence. You're coming to His footstool. You're coming to God. You're coming before the throne, where His presence will fill you and overwhelm you. So there's a big difference between the two. Even when you worship and praise, there's different methods to worship. You don't worship the same way you praise. Now, there are some things that you do in praise and you do in worship. For example, in both of them, you can sing. You can sing to praise. You can sing to worship. You can play instruments. You can use instruments to praise. You can use instruments to worship. But what's interesting is the sound of the music, the movement of the music. All of that's different from praise versus worship. You have praise, which is loud, it's upbeat, it's joyful, it makes you want to dance, makes you want to jump, you want to shout. Whereas worship is a little bit more, it's more slow, it's more intimate, it has a different feel than praise. And the same with the instruments. When they play praise versus when they play worship, there's a different feel with them. One's more intimate, one's more reverential, one has more honor to it, versus the other one, which is more fun and jubilant and exciting. So there's different things when it comes to that. Another thing, that's similar with both praise and worship is, you can lift your hands in praise. You lift your hands in worship. We can sing, Psalms 29:2, it says, "Ascribe to the Lord the glory due His name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness." So we worship Him in the splendor of holiness. So worship is focused more on the holiness, the reverence, the awe, the glory, the goodness of God. It's all focused on who He is, His attributes, His characters, just God and God alone and God Himself. Praise is being thankful and praising God for who He is, praising Him for what He's done in your life, praising Him for victory, praising Him because you're overwhelmed with His goodness, with His joy, with His provision, all those things. It's more of like a thankfulness for what He's done for you, what He's doing for you, a way to stand and give exaltation, versus worship, which is more focused on who God is, God Himself, God being holy, God being reverential towards God, God in His glory. All of those things has come into worship. It's more reverence. So it says split in reverence and understanding His holiness. Another thing we can do in worship that you don't really see as much in praise is bowing or kneeling. When you bow before God or kneel before God, that's a form of worship. Praise, you have dance, you have jumping, you have all these clapping, you have all of this in praise. Whereas in worship, it's a little different, where you bow, you kneel, it's showing reverence towards God. Psalms 95:6, it says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." So these are forms of worshiping God. Is when we bow, when we kneel before God. Another form of worship is praying. When you pray, you can pray during worship. You can talk to God, pray to Him, thank Him for who He is. All of that kind of stuff is a form of worship. When you really, you get down to it and just talk to Him one-on-one. Talk to Him how you're feeling. Talk to Him about who He is to you. Like, God, I just thank you, God. I just love you so much. You're the best. Stuff like that, where you just talk one-on-one with Him, a form of communion and fellowship with Him. Another thing that's very, very important when it comes to worship is we've got to make sure we have reverence towards God, a holy reverence, because we understand that God is holy. So when we understand that God is holy, we have to have a reverence towards Him, towards His presence, towards His holiness, an honor for it. It's not something that we can, treat for granted, or like, oh, it's just another song, or it's just this, it's just that. I have a reverential honor, a reverential respect, a reverential fear of the Lord of God, for His presence, for His holiness, for who He is. And when you come into worship, you have that sense of awe and wonder when you come in before Him into the inner courts. Hebrews 12:28, it says, "Therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe." Psalms 96:9, it says, "Worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness, and tremble before Him all the earth." So you worship Him in His holiness. You worship Him in awe of His holiness, of who He is. And it says, tremble before Him, having a sense of reverence for God and for His presence. That's really important, especially if you want to enter into, the farther, deeper intimacy with God, is having that reverence for who He is. Having the understanding that He is a good God, He is a great God, but He's also a holy God. And we approach Him with that understanding. Sometimes it can be easy for us, you have that friendship with God, you have that understanding of the Word, you understand His goodness, you understand His grace, you understand His love. And sometimes when we have all of this stuff, we can kind of treat God, as more common, or without having as much respect and honor for Him. We have the whole simplified grace message, which is great. Grace is amazing. Grace is awesome. I'm not saying anything negative about it. But I want you to understand that sometimes people can have grace extended to them from God, and because of that grace, they don't fear Him the same. They don't respect Him the same. They don't honor Him the same, because they're like, oh, I can do whatever I want to. I have grace. I can approach God however I want to because His grace covers me. I can carry in, all this mess from my life and bring it into the presence of God, and it's okay because His grace will cover me. And yes, His grace does cover us to an extent, but we've got to make sure we don't lose that honor and that respect for who He is as God Almighty, Jehovah, the one true God in all of His holiness and splendor, because you can go through the entire Bible, and anytime anyone had come and crossed the presence of God or come into the presence of God, throughout the whole Testament you can see it, different times throughout the Bible and Revelations you can see it, where people are overwhelmed by His presence, that they fall on their face. They say, woe is me, Lord, I'm not even worthy to be here, because they understand, they see who He is and His holiness. And in seeing who He is and His true holiness, they realize their own flaws, their own faults, the things in their life that aren't proper. And they're like, I don't deserve to be in here, because they're in awe, they're in reverence, they're in respect. And we've got to make sure we have that same awe, that reverence and respect when it comes to entering into worship before the Lord. Take it seriously. Take time with God serious. Don't let all these things going on distract you, or think it's like a normal thing, or it's just another song, or I'm just going to sing and do something because everybody else is doing it. But have a purpose in your heart that I'm coming before God. I'm going to experience Him. I want to stay in His presence. I want to know Him. I want to be with Him and have a respect for Him and who He is. Revelations 14:7, it says, "And He said with a loud voice, fear God and give Him glory, because the hour of His judgment has come, and worship Him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." So we fear Him, have that reverential fear, or a reverential honor to God. We can come and worship Him and be in awe of His glory and who He is. So we don't need to take something that's holy, like God, take something that's holy, His presence, and treat it as something common or something unimportant. We don't need to do that. We need to make sure we continue to honor it and hold respect for it. So, I kind of want to close today with explaining the two big differences between praise and worship and how they work together. You have praise, which is initiated by us. We start praise, it's a willing sacrifice. And then God will respond to praise. So that's when He moves in, His presence moves in, and the atmosphere will change from something we initiate to something God's doing. And there's a big change in the atmosphere when you switch from praise into worship. Praise is something we do. Worship is something God releases. So we praise, we lift up our voice, we shout, we do all these things, and it causes God to have a response to us, where He'll fill us with His presence. He'll overwhelm us with His glory. He'll move into the environment, and cause a shift in things. Praise is building the house for God, and worship is God moving in. So those are kind of the main differences between praise and worship. How worship's a little different than praise, and to understand that worship is moving closer to the presence of God. It's becoming more intimate with God, and it's, experiencing Him and coming to Him with reverence and honor, and experiencing His presence fuller from, coming out from the inside of us, resting on us, feeling the atmosphere we're in. All of that is a part of worship. So again, thank you guys so much for listening today. I hope it blessed you, and God bless.